I'm broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, picking up my kids from theater camp in my mother's backyard at twilight. Last night I had a lot of family over and we discussed the Libya situation. A lawyer was present, a very successful business lady was present, an old Union progressive Democrat, etc. So we had a good discussion. And then it got me thinking, and so let us frame things so everybody can understand. The question is, does the international community have the right to, or the duty even, to help a people throw off a repressive form of government? And the question is not, is there a duty to do so? The question is the mechanics of doing so. It isn't complicated, really. In the mechanics of doing so, what we have to say what we expect before it breaks out into open hostilities or escalates versus a negotiated solution. And it was the other day I watched the South Africans, and they were protesting against the Libya NATO bombing and saying Americans and the West only understands violence. They're bloodthirsty and their diplomacy challenged. And it's ironic with our caricature of Black Africa as a violent, savage place, and here they are. And so, I was looking at the issue with Vietnam, and Vietnam, apparently we killed 3 million Vietnamese carpet bombing them, and in Iraq, through all the infant mortality problems where the infant mortality rate doubled or even went up higher than that because of wiping out the infrastructure, we saw another million die. And in Afghanistan, how many more? And in Pakistan and in Yemen and in hit squads, and with the vice president's kill list, and the harsh treatment of people like Bradley Manning in detention, and the harsh treatment of whistleblowers. So all of this, is in the background of this moral discussion of the duty to intervene, obviously, after we've been doing these things. So we have to be very careful about assuming that we any longer have the moral authority. However, what about the duty? So the duty element, let's say fair enough, we have the rights, as Muammar Gaddafi himself said, to assist in the revolutionary movements for people to achieve self-determination. So in a sense, the shoe is on the other foot. On the one hand, you could make an argument that Gaddafi had a specific vision, and that there was a great social... Okay, so let's not appraise anybody. Let's just use a scientific method. So I have some notes I made. If I can get to them. Well, I'll have to do it impromptu. So, the first thing we look at is the assertion that Gaddafi has severely repressed his people, as had one of the most severe governments in the world. And that evidence does bear that out. The only metric we have is Freedom House's rating that I've examined, and it does place it in the lowest 7 nations out of all the nations in personal liberties. Now, I've also seen more favorable, but that's the one statistical reference, and I've seen perhaps even worse views. In the worst views area, you have the Lockerbie bombing and the massacre of 1,200 people in Libyan prison. So we say this was a violent regime. Yet when we examine what scientific data we do have, in the case of Freedom House, I have a single metric. It's difficult to go through everything else. With issues like poverty, income, things like that, you can usually get 2 or 3 different measurements. Sentiment, you would say you can't get sentiment in Libya, yet if you dig into the data, it's just work to parse through it, determine if these were fair interviews where people weren't afraid of criticizing within the interview, and of course, how is the questions phrased? It's very important. So you won't have to go through all this. Generally accepted indexes, you want 2 of them. So let's approach this scientifically and examine the legal right to assist in other people and their freedom, as France did in our own independence. So we do have a right and a duty to help people achieve self-determination. And we did define the path to do that with the UN Resolution 1973, which was broadly ceded to in the hope that it would not be abused. Now, I wish the wording had been a little bit different because it said civilian protection by all means necessary. Now, this UN 1973 requires that a ceasefire be the first condition objective, and the rebels have not been willing to accept a ceasefire until Gaddafi leaves because of NATO's attack on the Gaddafi loyalist forces. Now, my video that came from an interview on French television with Saif, the principal leader in Gaddafi's family after Gaddafi. He's like his protege. He's tried to be more westernized. He went to the London School of Economics and all of that. Well, at any rate, in this interview, which I had removed from my site for copyright infringement, unfortunately, he said that he was ready for elections now. They were ready for national peacekeepers now. They were ready for UN monitors now. They've been saying this for a long time. They've been asking for this, and it has been ignored. And one cannot overlook this hypocrisy, because you see, it's not entirely about whether Gaddafi is brutish and thuggish, which I'll get to in a minute. It's about whether we are duplicitous. If we want to intervene as a belligerent, we do need a declaration of war. We cannot do a little bit of interventionism as a belligerent and a little bit of interventionism as a peacekeeper. We have to choose our role. And this is not a gray area. This is very clearly black and white violations, allowing the rebels to fly troops in. There's no aspect of the mandate that suggests this is illegal to assist them. We are breaking the resolution consistently. How can anyone support that? The only thing we have to do to support NATO and US, even I personally find it repugnant under these circumstances, but if you want to support this mission, you have to support having our leadership be told that they must follow the law of this resolution, which is broad enough that we can get a democratic process underway in Libya. But they want to actually grind Gaddafi under their boot and spit on him. So let's look at the record and see if this is a fate he should deserve. So the first issue I ask you to consider is, if Libya was a repressive government, what reference metrics can we get scientifically? And the metric we can get scientifically is incarceration rate. So there's 9,000 prisoners in Libya, according to either UNICEF, UN, or Nation Master, which is a list of lists. And there are I think even 2 million American prisoners, but let's just play it safe and say 1.5 million. At any rate, if you use a 1.5 million figure, I think, no, it's 2 million. We also have 10 million who've had felony convictions. We have an incarceration rate of about 7 in 1,000, whereas Libya has an incarceration rate of about 1.5 per 1,000. So they have less than a quarter of a chance of being incarcerated as we do. In terms of violence, the death rate in Libya is much lower, according to these same things, UNICEF, United Nations, Human Development. If you go through all the statistics, Libya actually had a very good social safety network, similar to other socialist governments, and they had not engaged in a large war like Iraq, which really damaged certain aspects of society. But even in Iraq, there was a terrible tragedy to liquidate the technocratic class and their infrastructure, because even with the war with Iran, with their oil revenues, they were able to drive their universities and universal rights for women and all of that. So here in Libya, we must obey UN resolution, bring the parties to the table, bring UN observers, not transfer the money to the rebels. It's a breach of the law. It's fiduciary trust funds. There must be a United Nations mandate court process to do this. Not even a General Assembly vote. A General Assembly vote could be used to appoint a commission, and perhaps a commission could be ratified, but to take a sovereign nation's funds and transfer them, everyone involved is guilty of a felony. Fiduciary fund breach is a serious matter. It really is. Anybody who's in the financial industry should understand that. So, let us obey the law, and then later we can pay for our sins of breaking it. But if you want democracy for Libya and you want Gaddafi removed and you believe that people don't support him, simply bring talks in and don't assist the rebels illegally. If you want to do that, have another party enforce the no-fly zone and declare war and act as a belligerent. Thank you.